Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you are excited to learn about essential fundraising KPIs for SaaS businesses. Just a quick of an update. We updated our speaker, previous speaker, Nico, who is the CEO and CFO of Calqulate. He felt sick, so he was not able to join us today. But with us, we have Cameron, who will be taking care of this session today. Don't worry, you are in a great hand because Cameron is the head of growth of Calqulate, and he's been, part of this experience. He understands all of these fundraising KPIs for SaaS businesses, so he'll be going through all of those with us. A quick of an intro about our speaker. Cameron Murphy is the head of growth of Calqulate. He has 15 years plus experience in B2C and B2B SaaS companies. He's worked with high growth companies in Canada, Malta, Ireland, Germany, and Finland, obviously. And his areas of expertise is, management, go-to-market strategies, branding. And as the head of growth of Calqulate, he's been involved with, every aspect of growth in Calqulate, including the growth of the finances, the talent, and what have you. So he really understands how all of this plays out. That's why I told you, you are in great hands that he's going to be taking us through this session. With that being said, I would like to welcome onto the stage, Cameron.
Hey everyone, thanks for the lovely intro there, Kelvin. And so my name's Cam. I think Kelvin has said it all already. And I'll be taking you through the presentation and also answering any questions you might have. So in this talk, we're going to be looking at two examples. That is companies looking for seed round. It can also apply to bridge funding, which is kind of between seed round and Series A. And then the second case study will be with Series A. They both are raising funds, but they both have different focuses for the KPIs, as we're going to see. So let's look at the next slide. So full disclosure, this isn't the first time we are running this event. So before we start, there's a couple of things to just cover. It's basically the most commonly asked questions and just some concepts and ideas that are worth bearing in mind going forward. So let's take a quick look at VC funding versus bootstrapping. So VC funding means that at each stage of a funding round, so seed, Series A, B, C, D, you're going to sell between 10 and 20% of your company. And what that does is it accelerates your growth. So you sell a part of your company for money, and you use that money to grow the business and reach the next funding stage to get more money. What the ultimate fallout of that is that in 5 to 10 years, you're going to sell your company. VCs aren't interested in helping you run a family business for decades to pass on to your children. They want profit. They want it as fast as possible, and they want to make a nice fat exit. So bear that in mind if you are going to go down this path, that ultimately it leads to the sale of your company. Alternatively, there's bootstrapping, where that is you self-finance your company. Hold on one second there, Speedy Gonzalez. Go back there one, thanks. So basically bootstrapping is, by definition, you're pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, as the expression goes. And that's where you fund the money yourself, you fund the company yourself, you retain full ownership of the company, and you reinvest any initial customer profits into growing the company further. The two concepts are not mutually exclusive. Many companies start off bootstrapped and then they move to VC funding. The benefits of that, you'll have a more mature business to exchange cash for equity for. And because of that, you can get higher valuations and retain more ownership of the company. Okay, so with that said, next slide. The most common question we get from people is, when should I raise funds? And it's really like asking, how long is a piece of string? There is no definite answer, but what we have come up with are a couple of questions that you should ask yourself. And depending on your answers, that's whether you should raise funds or not. So do you already have revenue? Obviously, it's easier to get money from an investor if they can see that you're generating revenue. Conversely, if you are generating revenue, maybe you should consider bootstrapping by reinvesting that money back into the business to maybe hire new team members or do further advertising. The other thing to consider is a lack of resources damaging your business. For example, do you just lack the critical knowledge on your development team for like data architecture, and that's really, really holding back your product? So for example, if your company is being hurt by a lack of resources, it might be time to raise funds. Do you have a scalable and international business model? For example, your local bakery, it has an international business model. There are bakeries in every country all over the world. However, scaling a bakery isn't, it's not that scalable basically. So that's why we focus mostly on SaaS business model. It's the most scalable. It's usually deployed on the cloud, and it's suitable for international business development. Next thing to consider is, have you refined your processes and technology as much as you possibly can? So this is basically like, before you go buying new clothes, have you already grown out of the clothes that you own? And you're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. There should be a strong drive to better the company because you've already hit your existing growth limitations. The second 2 points are kind of related. Are there active competitors within your industry? I think there's very few of us who exist in a vertical or space that doesn't have competition. And what you're doing is you're essentially competing against those people. So if they've raised funding, they have a lot more capital than you do, and they will eventually outpace you either through hiring key talent, going to market faster, or outspending you for customer acquisition. The simple answer to that, should I raise funds? If you answered yes to more than one question on the previous slide, it's a signal that you should definitely consider raising funds. And it's something to maybe discuss with the rest of your management team, or maybe someone that you know in the VC space. All right. Where financial analytics fits in is that it can guide you into when you need to raise funds. So some of those questions can be best answered by looking at your financial analytics. And your financial analytics, they don't lie. They will show you when and how much you need to fund your future growth. And you do that through forecasting, which brings us on to the next slide. So when you're forecasting metrics and KPIs. There's an extremely important definition or a distinguishing factor between metrics and KPIs. Metrics are anything that you can measure quantifiably. Number of website visitors, revenue, bananas. Not all metrics are important. Whereas KPIs, on the other hand, are extremely important. That's why they're key performance indicators. Again, there's a little bit of overlap between the two. They're not mutually exclusive. Almost all KPIs are metrics, but only the metrics that matter are KPIs. Another note is, for example, this webinar. Metrics for this webinar are the number of people who liked the LinkedIn post, the number of people who commented, the number of people who registered is becoming a KPI, but the real KPI is the number of you that have attended. And currently there's 21 of you. So my KPI for this event would be 21. And the most important thing about starting your journey along the VC path is that you measure everything. The more that you measure things, the more that you can improve it, as Peter Drucker said. Oh no, wait, I totally butchered that. If you don't measure it, you can't improve it. That's what Peter Drucker said. So yeah, next slide. The next thing is that if you know that you need to raise funds, you need to know how much. It's all well and good to have investors who are interested in the product, or maybe they contact you, but you need to know how much money you're going to ask for. That is like the foundational, that is the starting point for this whole entire process. And it's called an ask. So you need to calculate your ask. How much are you asking for? You can be very upfront and very honest. For example, I'm asking for 3.5 million. And that's a great place to start your discussion. So next slide. So let's just say you want to raise 3.5 million. You can approach this in two ways. You can create a revenue forecast, which estimates how much money you plan on making in about 2 to 3 years' time. And you can work backwards from that to calculate the expenses and the staff forecasts. And then you know how much money you need to get there. You can work the other way around and say that, okay, I want to start with a revenue goal of 20,000 euro MRR. And then you would build a forecast. So a revenue forecast for that means that you literally write down how much of each of your products you sell every month. And then you have a monthly sales target. You can break that in. You can break that down into a weekly sales target. You basically need to know how much money you plan to make and what you need to sell to make that. The next thing that you can do is calculate your expense forecast. So what are the types of tools, equipment, and things that you need to generate that income? It could be things like laptops. It might be rent for an office space. It might be web hosting services or other critical infrastructure. Then after you know how much money you need to make, how much it costs to make that money, you then need to start filling seats. So do you have an inbound or outbound marketing plan? If you have an outbound marketing plan, you'll need to hire sales staff. So you need to start planning a staff cost forecast. If you hire, for example, one sales development rep, maybe they need 2 lead researchers to feed them leads, to email, to book meetings. You'll also have a pretty good idea of how many sales each person in a team needs to generate. So from your revenue forecast, you can again work backwards and see how many people you need to hire to get there. The hiring plan and the expense forecast kind of feed off each other. So if you figure out, oh, I need like 3 new SEO people to join my team, then on your expense forecast, you should also add in 3 licenses for something like SEMrush. Maybe it's another seat on another software that is essential in your stack. You'll need to rent or purchase 3 new laptops. So they, like I said, yeah, it's kind of circular. They feed off each other, but ultimately everything in your expense forecast and your hiring plan should feed back into your revenue forecast, because you're hiring these people and buying these things to meet your revenue forecast. So when you combine your revenue forecast, money coming in, with your expense forecast and staff cost, money going out, you get your cash flow forecast. And from your cash flow forecast, you can create some essential KPIs. These are the things that you have to hit on the target in order to make your goals. When you fill out those 4 items, you also figure out your monthly cash burn rate and your cash runway. So if you go to a venture capital fund and you say, I want 1 million euro, and you have a monthly cash burn rate of 200,000 euro, that means that your cash runway is for 5 months. And you can adjust your revenue forecast accordingly to make more money, to reinvest, to extend your cash runway, or you can cut your expenses or adjust your hiring plan or adjust your KPIs. So maybe your sales staff need to make more sales in order to hit the target. So with all that said, let's take a look at our first case study. I'd love to know if any of you are currently looking for seed funding or for bridge funding. It would be nice if you could put a thumbs up in the chat. So with your seed round, you are more than likely bootstrapping up until this point. You've had your great idea. You've maybe started work on a minimum viable product. You might have a couple of other co-founders. Maybe a rich aunt or uncle has given you some money to develop the product a little bit, but up until now, it's mainly bootstrapping. To get investment for a seed round, the focus is not on your KPIs. You're not going to have any yet. And the ones that you do have will suck. They will look terrible. For example, with Calqulate, our customer acquisition costs in the early days were, should we say, they were north of 15,000 euro. So we had a KPI, it just looked terrible. The seed round is designed to help you fix that. And by fix that, we mean it'll help you get the infrastructure and the initial traffic and customers in place to have your first KPIs and your first metrics that you're tracking. In your seed round, because you're not focusing on KPIs, you need to focus on these other items. So investors are really interested to understand if you understand the problem that you're solving. They want to know what the total addressable market is. They basically want to know how much potential does your idea and your product have? Does it solve a real world problem, and how many people does it solve them for? Next, you need to focus on the demand of your product. So who does your product help the most? If we go back to the bakery analogy, the bakery solves the problem of hungry people maybe to or from their way to work. And that's exactly what concentrate on defining your ICP is. So your ICP is your ideal customer profile. So investors want to know exactly who you're selling to, what their pain points are, and what your product fixes. What does it solve for them? You should have multiple ICPs, but not too many. If you have too many, you're not focused enough, basically. And the last point that venture funds very often want to see is, do you have a solid management team? Do you have the people around you to support you that have the knowledge, that have maybe done it before or been in the industry for a long time? Perhaps they're experts in an adjacent field, or they have knowledge that that can contribute greatly to the product success. So yeah, you need to show that you understand the products, which is pain points. You need to focus on the solution to those problems. And then from those two things, you'll be able to figure out who exactly it is that wants to buy your products. We said you don't need to focus on KPIs. Any KPIs that you do have, though, are important because it shows that you're in a more advanced stage than perhaps another investment that they're considering to make. Early numbers, like number of users, is great for proof of concept or early traction. Very many of the investors that we dealt with in the earlier stages wanted a minimum number of products, which is great because we had a target. Okay, we have a KPI of 10 users. Once we hit 10 users, we know that we can move that conversation forward with that investor. Other KPIs that we have been given, or that are quite typical for a seed round, are monthly recurring revenue. So if you are generating users, are you able to convert any of those users to paying customers? And that's really, really important because that's kind of not proof of concept, but proof of your business model. Anything that fits your story is a little bit vague, but like we said, it can be your founder's story. It can be how you came up with the idea. Like, for example, Nico, he's been a SaaS CFO for nearly 20 years. And Nico was sick of doing the same repetitive tasks for many different clients. So he came up with a software that automates a lot of the financial tasks that he hated. Turns out you can sell that to other people who also hate financial tasks. But that is all part of a story that you can build and communicate to investors. And in the early stages, they'll invest in that more than terrible KPIs or non-existent metrics. And lastly, total addressable market. So you need to do your research. This is like a ballpark figure. A lot of the total addressable market numbers that are thrown around are optimistic at best, but that's okay. It's just something that shows that you've done your initial research and that there is an appetite for your product. If your total addressable market is too small and you're looking for an amount that is too big, then you will very quickly figure out that you're not going to be able to generate enough revenue from customers to cover the cost of your initial investment. So the two need to be somewhat in line. For example, if you have a total addressable market of 100 people and you're charging €100 per month, that's €1,000 that you can generate per month. So you should ask for maybe, I know these numbers are incredibly small, but like if you're asking for more than, we'll say 100,000 for your seed round, it might not make the most sense. So yeah, make sure your net is big enough. The seed round valuation depends on the round size. So depending on how much money you intend to make and how much it costs you to make that money, you're going to know how much you're going to ask for. So your valuation will vary depending on that. And it varies a lot. For example, in the US, money is cheap. So typically startups get a lot larger round. Like I said, the benchmark amount for the US is 4 million. And for Europe, it's a lot smaller at 1.7 million. This puts Europe at a tremendous disadvantage. We are competing against companies that are better funded than us. However, the US does not have a lot of public funding, whereas Europe has a lot of young business grants and financial instruments like that, which are non-dilutive. So whereas a US company might get more money, the owners might retain less ownership by the time the company goes public or is acquired. Whereas in Europe, owners and co-founders tend to keep more of the equity of the company because they've had governmental support or European level support. Typically, the time between getting Series A funding, getting seed funding and Series A funding is 18 months. That is very much worth bearing in mind. That is the medium time. There are companies that do it a lot sooner, like the product just takes off instantaneously. And there are companies that might actually run out of seed funding. They'll have to bootstrap for a couple of months, but then they reach a point where they can then get a Series A. So 18 months is just, again, a medium time. Calqulate is currently going on, we're coming up to 1 year now. Yeah, and we're looking for funding again. Companies raising 2 to 3 million in total in pre-Series A funding have the highest conversion rate to Series A. What this basically means is that if you get your seed funding of 2 to 3 million, the company's valuation will be higher. So when the company eventually does get sold, it will sell for an amount that is attractive to VCs to cover their initial cost of investment and risk. If your company is undervalued, you will have a tougher time convincing people to put more money into it unless you have amazing growth or shockingly good MRR for the stage that you're at. And companies raising seed from top investors is a highly subjective term, but basically major investment firms, they're much more likely to go on to Series A because they have the support network, they have the advice, they have the guidance to grow at a pace that fits them and not burn out or fade away, as the case may be. The seed funding was easy. It's all about story. It's about building a beautiful team. And, you know, it's all about potential and it's all about what might happen or what you will do. Series A is a whole different ballgame. Now it's basically like, what did you do with the money that we gave you last time? That's what it boils down to. So this is why I'm saying measuring stuff from a very early age of your company helps you tremendously to answer that question and to, again, develop your narrative. KPIs matter hugely. Investors will want to know everything. If you're a SaaS business, they'll want to know, well, we'll go into the KPIs later, but they'll want to know a lot, and they will check diligently whether those numbers are correct or not. So before you hit Series A, from growing with your seed fund, you should know what your targets are. You should have hit most of your milestone KPIs. So remember that revenue forecast that you made? That should either have been spot on target, or maybe you've updated it based on some critical things that you've discovered. Maybe a certain ICP isn't selling as well as it should. Maybe you've adjusted your pricing. It's okay to change the plan. You just need to have a plan and you need to measure where you're going. Otherwise, you're just lost at sea. So Series A, the main function of Series A is to help you optimize for scaling. So that's going into a new market, that is maybe expanding your vertical, or that is maybe looking for a new ideal customer profile. With your seed funding, you will have a minimum viable product, you will have customers, and you should have a team. And you should be refining your ideal customer profile. So for example, with Calqulate, when we first started off, we thought our ideal customer were really young startups. So people who are pre-seed, people who have a really good knowledge of the product that they're developing, but they maybe don't know finance so much. Those people are still our ICP, but we found out that companies who are in Series A or Series B have a greater need for the product because they're the ones that need those KPIs we've been talking about. Whereas earlier stage startups don't necessarily have any KPIs yet. So always refine who your ideal customer profile is. It's okay to change it, but you need to change your marketing strategy to fit that. And that's the next thing, is you need to develop a clear go-to-market strategy. So once you know who your ICP is, you'll know what they read, where they hang out, what they do, what sort of content do they consume, and you can make a very clear go-to-market strategy. That is an entire topic in and of itself, but you should basically pick a geography. You should probably limit it down to some regions within that country. You should make sure that you have enough customers in that country, and you should have an idea of how you're going to reach those customers, whether it's outbound, cold calling, emailing. It might be inbound, which is things like a webinar or lead magnets, things like that. And then focus on your business model rather than the strength of your idea. So what that means to say is that you might have a really, really strong idea, but you might be selling it for too cheap. You might have a really, really great product, but you're charging too much for it compared to your ICP. So you need to adjust your business model. You maybe need to look at the way that you monetize it. We are dealing mostly with SaaS businesses. So another change that you could make to your business model is, for example, instead of doing monthly payments, you just ask for annual upfront payments. If you're a B2C company and you're selling a 6-month membership for a dating service, maybe you're not making sales because people don't want to commit that much money upfront for something that they don't intend to use long-term. So really adjust your business model. When you have the financial KPIs coming in, it will be very obvious to you what needs to be adjusted and what isn't working. So these are the deep and dirty KPIs that I was talking about earlier. These are things, if you're running a SaaS business, you need to track these. Customer acquisition cost is pretty self-explanatory. It's the amount of money you spend in your sales and marketing department, in addition to the money that you pay for staff costs. When you add those two together every month and divide it by the total number of customers that you have acquired, you will get your customer acquisition cost. Having a lower customer acquisition cost is not necessarily always a good thing. You might spend less to acquire shittier customers, basically, to put it vulgarly. If your CAC goes up and the quality of customer goes up, that's really good. And how you can measure or equate that is by looking at the next metric, which is LTV, and that's your customer lifetime value. So if customers are getting more expensive to acquire, but the amount of money that that customer generates over their lifetime is going up faster, that's a good thing. Whereas inversely, if your customer acquisition cost is going down and your lifetime value is staying stagnant, that's not a bad thing. But if your lifetime value is also decreasing, that is a bad thing. The third metric, or the third KPI, is CAC payback time. So if it costs me 1,000 euros to acquire a customer, and I charge a subscription of 100 euro per month, that means that it will take me 10 months to recuperate the costs of acquiring that customer. The smaller that you can make the CAC payback time, the more efficient your growth engine will be. So for example, if instead of charging a monthly subscription of €100, I charged an annual upfront subscription of €1,200, then I would have a negative CAC payback time. So for every customer that I acquire for 1,000, I'm literally making €200 on the spot as soon as they sign up. And that money you can then reinvest into acquiring more customers. And it's this growth engine effect that people really seek after. Net revenue retention is another one. So you might be acquiring customers for a good price. They're generating a nice income throughout their life cycle, and they have a negative CAC payback time. But if that customer quits after 1 year, then it causes inefficiency, because there is an infinite amount of customers, but it's way more expensive to get new customers than it is to keep an old customer happy. So net revenue retention is really important here. So are you able to hold on to that customer and keep them generating revenue? And are you able to keep them generating more revenue year on year? That's what product development is for. The more features that you launch in your product, the more of a business reason you have for charging more to your customers. Next thing is sales conversion analytics. So you'll have either an inbound or an outbound marketing channel, and you need to watch that like a hawk. I mean, you need to know how many customers are coming in at the top of the funnel, whether it's inbound or outbound for generating them. You need to know how many of them are converting. And it's really good if you know how long it takes for a marketing prospect to become a customer. All of those things you can adjust, and the only way you can adjust them is if you're measuring them, so you know if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. So sales conversion analytics is, again, a whole other product. It's a whole other conversation, but yeah, measure them. Venture lenders will like, or venture capitalists will like to look at that. And the last thing is churn. And churn is basically, it's the simplest one. It's like, do people take your product and then leave after 3 months? Do they take your product and leave after 4 to 5 months? Like, you need to know what the turnover is in terms of customer life cycle. And churn will have an impact on your lifetime value. And a really interesting one is the relationship between CAC payback time and churn. So some companies fall into this trap where they have a customer acquisition cost. Well, again, we'll say €1,000 to get a customer. They charge €100 per month, and the customer churns after 8 months. So that means that you've theoretically lost €200. And the only way you're going to know if that's happening is by calculating these things. It can be a silent killer. So you might have great MRR, you might have loads of customers signing up, but if they're churning before they recover the cost of acquisition, you're burning money in the background and you might not even know it. This is by far the most complicated topic. At the end of this talk, there is some further reading that you can do to try and figure out your valuation for Series A. It involves things like EBITDA tables, which are these multiplication tables based on your vertical, based on your KPIs, that you can come up with a rough idea. Ultimately, each venture capitalist will have their own valuation that they're going to throw at you. Whatever it is, the benchmark amounts are typically, again, they get closer to parity here. In the US, it's $13 million, and in Europe, it's 12.5 million. Yeah, so as you can see here, the playing field is a little bit more even now in terms of Europe versus the US, because the product is a little bit more established. Typically, US companies are looking to move to Europe, and European companies are looking to move to the US. So yeah, the playing field equalizes somewhat. The size depends again on the valuation, which is calculated on a whole bunch of KPIs. Key takeaways. start collecting data now. Start with metrics, the useless things. You'll very quickly figure out which of those are important and which of those are indicative of growth for your company. Once you know what those things are, share them with investors because they love to see the facts behind a good story. You're going to have to do it anyway. So it's better to start earlier than to have to kind of come up with a year's worth of retroactive data. Some data might even just be lost. And the less data you have, the harder it is to convince someone to give you the money for a part of the company. It's like trying to sell a car, but not letting someone see inside the car or do a test drive beforehand. Before Series A, most startups are not data-driven. That is okay. But once you get your seed funding, part of that seed funding needs to go towards collecting data for your company, whether that's paying for subscriptions for tools that do that, or hiring someone whose job it is to track those things. You need to have data. And investors will take you more seriously, obviously, if you track the right KPIs. If you're a SaaS business and you're going into an investor meeting with the amount of users your website has on Google Analytics, they're not going to take you as seriously as if you go in there with how many customers you have and how much MRR they're generating. So the KPIs matter tremendously. And like I said, the only way you're going to find your KPIs is by starting to track metrics. So yeah, if we had to summarize everything in one slide.
Thank you guys for the comments, and we really appreciate that. The recording and slides are going to be posted also on the social media, and also we'll send to you guys via email for further reading, because what Cam has covered here is quite extensive. You might need to go in details for some topics or some area to really understand how it works. So here are links that, for CAC payback time, to understand more on customer lifetime value and what have you. Feel free to go through them, read more and get ready for your next round of fund. We'll be happy to hear all the good news about how Cam's webinar and knowledge helped you to raise your next round of fund. So we'll be excited to be part of that journey with you guys. With that being said, I think we'll call it a day for now. Thank you so much, guys, for joining. And we'll reach out to you for our next webinar, and we hope to see you guys real soon. Thank you, Cam, for your time. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, and enjoy the rest of your day.